The manhwa begins by telling us that the rules of human society have never changed, where the strong dominate and the weak live on scraps, as we see a writer begging the protagonist to remove negative comments from his novel, because otherwise he won't be able to write anymore. But he tells him that it's garbage, and a mixed breed dog is better than his protagonist, so he throws the writing in the trash and tells him to leave. Later we see him with his boss, who tells him he's done a good job and the clients are satisfied. So if he makes a new list of movie comments, the department director position is his, while he says he will study the jobs and thinks he's the strong man who can rise to a high position no matter the circumstances. Suddenly a voice asks him if that's true, and the protagonist appears in a virtual world, where the voice tells him to prove it, and that he will send him to a world built with the works he reviewed, to prove that he's better than the protagonists he called stupid in his comments. The protagonist tries to convince the system that what he did wasn't that bad. So the system says that they will move on to the elimination phase and begins to disintegrate him. The protagonist yells at the system to wait and that it should operate by fixed rules, and it responds that it acts according to the procedure, so if the host refuses to perform the test, the system can perform a cleanup and delete him. The protagonist then asks what will happen if he accepts the test, and the system tells him that at the end of his life in the other world, he will return to the original point in his life where he was taken from. So the protagonist accepts and says to show him what he can do, as he's a superior man in any world. But the system tells him that its role is to discipline him according to what he said in his comments, and activates the transformation, in which it gives him a stagnant technological memory, blocks his physiological functions, his spiritual talent, and his concept of geography, all based on his cruel comments. So the protagonist protests, but then here's the comment where he said a mixed breed dog was better than the protagonist, and the system imports that form for him, while transporting him to the world, where we see he completed the cross as a dog, who barks at the system, telling it that it tricked him. The protagonist is in the city of Gusu, where the world's largest bank opened a branch, turning the city into an important commercial center with half of the world's wealth. His mission is to become the richest merchant there. We see him running away from some dogs with a sausage while trying to call the system. The system tells him that he has no time limit to complete the mission, and he is expected to do so within his dog's lifespan, which is 12 years. The protagonist then throws the sausage to the dogs and gives them a speech to join him, promising them a well-fed and worry-free life. However, the dogs just take the sausage and leave, leaving the protagonist depressed. Moreover, he hasn't eaten or rested since he crossed over, so he must act quickly. He yells at the system that he will succeed. Suddenly, a girl named Zioan appears, and the merchants offer her their products, and she buys them all. The protagonist approaches her with tender eyes and says he needs a suitable person to depend on, and that his goal is Huang Wanian, a wealthy merchant who arrived in the city and whom the girl serves, and he plans to use her as a stepping stone to get to him. The girl hugs him tightly, and even though she strangles him, the protagonist says it's a success. Suddenly, she says she wants a stew. The cook tells her he hopes she didn't take it from the street because he's not allowed to serve it, and she says the protagonist came to her voluntarily. The cook doubts it because he says there wouldn't be such a stupid dog, but he will still demonstrate his skills, which terrifies the protagonist, who realizes that his information is wrong and understands that Zioan likes to eat dog meat. The protagonist bites the cook and runs away, thinking he can solve the mission later, as he must now run for his life. Zioan takes a knife and says that dinner is escaping, when the protagonist crashes into the legs of a man who asks what all the commotion in the kitchen is about. This turns out to be the butler Zio, the most dangerous person the protagonist did not want to deal with, and he wonders why he suddenly entered the kitchen. Zioan approaches with the knife and asks him to catch the protagonist for dinner, who says that actually, she is the most dangerous of the two at the moment. In the midst of both, the protagonist wonders what to do and says he must hurry and think quickly of a solution, as he will not die in a place like that. Suddenly Huang Wanian enters, asking the girl what she did this time. The protagonist is moved and approaches the merchant, thinking that if he decides to adopt him, the crisis will be resolved. So he must impress him quickly enough. But he says that dog meat is the hardest to come by, so it's normal for Zioan to be greedy. This puts the protagonist in a tight spot, wondering if he should roll and jump, do a belly dance, cry for mercy, or take hostages. But then he understands that what nobles and powerful people value the most is the loyalty of their dogs. So he sets out to show how loyal he is and starts barking at everyone except Wanian. Zioan wonders what he's doing, and Wanian says he barked in his face instead of taking the opportunity to escape, so maybe he's stupid. This freezes the protagonist, who thinks it's all over. But then the butler congratulates his master, saying that the protagonist was protecting him because he recognizes that Wanian is just and noble in character. So even animals compete for his loyalty, and his actions turn the protagonist into a loyal and brave dog who will defend his master with his life, like legendary dogs. Which means Wanian will sweep the world of Gusu's business with his strength. His explanation leaves everyone perplexed, including the protagonist, but pleases Wanian, who says he's right, and that even a dog knows who the owner of the place is. The protagonist is surprised and says that people are not what they seem, as the butler is talented. And since the protagonist recognizes him as his master, Wanian lets him stay. Zioan then asks if they can't have him for dinner, and the merchant tells her they can't anymore. And he gives the protagonist the name Huang Da, so he is happy that the outcome turned out good in the end. But he thinks Huang should stop touching him. The protagonist tells us that being adopted by the Huangs brought him many benefits, such as having his own home, no longer running for food every day, and having the protection of the family. We see him asking the dogs that used to chase him if they now understand who's in charge of the city. The protagonist declares that he's back. However, he also mentions that he had to learn a lot to be the dog of a wealthy man, like knowing when to please him, when to be quiet to avoid being a bother, and when to be extravagant to protect his owner's decency. The protagonist says that he has already proven his worth as he stands in front of the gate of the house, and the butler and Wanian praise his loyalty. He says that thanks to them, he can now concentrate on the mission. He wonders how to get Wanian's money, thinking that taking the money from his warehouse is the easiest but too risky. On the other hand, if Wanian died, he could find a way to inherit his wealth, but he doesn't know if the merchant has any children. Suddenly, a man kicks the protagonist, making him angry, but he realizes that they are businessmen from the city. The group arrives with Wanian, who asks them why they are there. But the leader tells him not to be foolish because he knows what he did. He accuses Wanian of making a massive purchase that caused his family's store to lose a lot of money, among other moves that turned the market upside down in a few months. Wanian says that he initially wanted to do business with them, but they were too busy to see him, so he had no choice but to act alone, even though he didn't intend to affect his colleagues. Then the leader accepts his mistake and tries to negotiate with Wanian. But Wanian finds it all amusing now, so he'll keep things as they are. This enraged the leader, who threatens to kill him, while his colleagues restrain him and advise him not to be impulsive. We see the protagonist witnessing the scene and realizing that Wanian burned money to suppress the other merchants, which started a brutal price war with them. We see a guard forcing the leader out, and the protagonist says that he has a bold idea. At night, some guards see the protagonist lurking in the accounting room and believe that he's only there to watch them. But he actually enters and opens a book, thinking of using dignified business methods to empty the Huang family's wealth, and we see that the book is their accounting book. The protagonist says that as a dog, he can't do much, so he needs a puppet. He chooses the leader of the businessmen, Wang Yaod, who is on the brink of bankruptcy. The protagonist finds him drunk on the street, and Yaod is about to beat him up again when the protagonist orders the dogs to surround him. He thinks he can conquer Yaod by being a superstitious old man. Yaod wonders why there are so many dogs, and the protagonist orders them to sing, which surprises the old man. The protagonist says that's just the effect he wants. Then he enters while telling Yaod in his mind to submit to his authority. Yaod is shocked, thinking the protagonist is the fairy of the dogs, although in stories, it should be a fox, but in the end, he doesn't care. He thinks he will become a gentle and beautiful maiden who will fall in love with him. The protagonist watches him confidently, wondering why he looks at him strangely. Yaod thinks he has lost everything anyway, so he starts undressing while telling the protagonist to come for him. This scares the protagonist, who wonders why he is taking off his clothes. He throws a scroll at him, leaving him stunned, while thinking he aimed for the wrong target and runs away to find the next one. In the alley, the protagonist wonders why his plan didn't work and questions the authors of the stories he mentioned for writing like that. Meanwhile, Yaod checks the scroll and thinks that the fairy of the dogs couldn't bear to see him fail, so she wrote that message to inspire him. He shouts that he won't disappoint her expectations and will become a man worthy of her. The protagonist realizes that his plan worked, but he doesn't know how and wonders what it means to be worthy of him. But he says it doesn't matter because now that man will be his tool. And the protagonist has officially entered the commercial war of Gusu. While laughing at the system and telling it to wait and see what he can do, one of the dogs steals his sausage. It is told to us that Yaod had no talent for farming at an early age because he had weak bones. So his father sent him to a private school to study, which he did for 40 years, but still had no luck in life. and that when he inherited his family business, he spent his time learning how to defeat Wanian. But despite his plans, his family's savings ended up disappearing. So he tried to drown his sorrows in wine until the night he met the protagonist and changed his life. He says that the protagonist visited him often at night like an elf and brought him success stories to lift his spirit, although he felt he could do everything just by looking at her. Meanwhile, the protagonist thinks the brainwashing was too effective. There, Yaud says he took back the leadership of his business and bought all the pills on the market. Although his colleagues warned him that he would lose everything if he bought the pills, he remained firm in trusting the dog fairy, as her vision gave him an advantage in business. And then a messenger announces that the Huangs bought all the pills in the port, so the medicine shops were crazy with anxiety. And Yaud's colleagues ask him to sell them the pills, while thinking that the merchant's fortune tripled and wondering if the dog fairy is real. Then we see Yaud giving a speech in front of more merchants, telling them that the fairy asked him to create the Dog Fairy Association to help them. One of them tells him that the fee is too high, but Yaud tells him that it will be reimbursed if he gets more people to join the association. There we are told that it soon became a great power in the city capable of competing with the families. And we see the merchants kneeling in front of a statue of the protagonist to thank him. But Yaud says that he never appeared in front of more people, only in front of him, which made him feel special. The protagonist thinks that he gave Yaud a reputation thanks to the intelligence he obtained from the Huangs, and now 70% of small merchants have joined the association. Then Yaud gets his attention, and the protagonist wonders why he's so annoying today. When the merchant hands him a card with access to all his family's funds, the protagonist wonders why he's giving it to him so easily, but thinks that Yaud finally understood that he is nothing without his guidance. And the protagonist takes the card, while thinking that the merchant has no choice but to be his tool. And the system announces that the protagonist's money has increased, so he is now ranked 17th in wealth in Gusu. Yaud is glad that the protagonist accepted him, which makes him uncomfortable, but he thinks that he will become a rich man when he controls the whole city. Then we see a business meeting, attended by Wanian and his family. The protagonist yawns, and Xiaoan says that he doesn't seem very energetic lately, so maybe he's sick and they can eat him. The butler says that the protagonist has probably been busy having a meeting with some bitches, but he is still loyal enough to follow Wanian despite being exhausted, so he and others must swear loyalty to him to the death. The protagonist thinks that it is the butler who meets with bitches, and that he wouldn't have followed them if it weren't for the meeting. When Yaud makes his entrance, the protagonist thinks that he hasn't had a rest in a month because of training him, and that the reason he is there is to be able to see the last adversary standing in his way of commercial dominance. These are the noble family, who control most of the commerce in the city. They, after making their entrance, begin the meeting and say that it is to prepare for the next immortality exam. However, since the city's market was chaotic, the offerings from the families were smaller, and they ask Wanian and Yaud for an explanation. The protagonist says that the nobles are so powerful that normal merchants cannot compete, and they ask for compensation of 3 million taels of gold, which the protagonist says is actually 30 million taels of silver, which scares the merchants, and both Yaud and Wanian say that it is too much. The nobles say that if they affect the exam, the Immortal sect will blame them for it, but Wanian says that they didn't break any laws, so they can't blame them for anything. And seeing him so confident makes the protagonist happy, because with him in charge, he will have room to act. The nobles tell Wanian that this is southern China, and there the law doesn't matter, which makes Xiaoan angry for being so arrogant. Wanian asks his butler about the association of the Dog Fairy, and he tells his master about Yaud's history, who is always one step ahead of them and has taken much of their money, while the protagonist frees himself from Xiaoan, and says that it's all thanks to what it took to train him. The butler suspects where Yaud got the information, but says that everything is always monitored by guards and the protagonist. So Wanian says not to worry about it and to continue making money, so the protagonist plans to visit the studio again to see their plans, because he can continue to act behind their backs for his benefit. Then we see the Wuji sect temple, where the Immortals prepare to go to the city of Gusu, since the noble family reported that the association of the Dog Fairy was causing confusion, and they could be working with demons, so they requested their intervention. We are told that after the meeting, the noble family and the Huang family went to war. As a result, the market was a disaster plunged into chaos, which the protagonist says is a great opportunity to rise. It is also mentioned that the association was only a group of small business owners united, whom the big business owners saw as nothing more than clowns. But in the current state of the city, even magnates could lose their money if they made a wrong move. Later on, the protagonist hears about some Huang shipments, which he quickly informs Yao about, and he says he won't disappoint his expectations. We then see him promoting the association on the street, but passers-by beat him up. At night, Yao reports the results to the protagonist, who thinks his profits have increased considerably. Yao also gives him a special sausage he made at a restaurant. Later, it is mentioned that while the families were fighting, the association grew like a snowball, and we see the merchants who previously looked down on Yao asking him to let them join. Some time later, Wanian says they lost more money than planned and that there must be talent in the noble family, but his steward tells him it wasn't them, but the association, who took advantage of the family battle to make them spend more money than they should have. Therefore, Wanian thinks it's a pity that Yao ended up being a man and that the final move of the noble family will come soon. The system announces that the protagonist has reached the 5th place in wealth in the city, so he celebrates his success. He thinks the only thing standing in his way is Wanian, so he should get rid of the big merchants. Meanwhile, Yao prepares a gift in the background and says it's like a wedding gift. The protagonist thinks it's only a matter of time and tells the system that there is nothing stopping him. Yao is about to ask him to marry him when someone asks for the merchant, and we see that it is Meng Xiaohua, an immortal master who was instructed to go there to kill the demons. Yao welcomes Xiaohua, but then the leader of the nobles appears, who tells the master that Yao is colluding with demons. Xiaohua doesn't know what he's talking about, but the noble says that he invited the immortal to do justice for having joined the demons to create the association, and asks him to hand over the prota. The prota gets scared that there are people who are in charge of catching demons, and thinks that Yao will betray him, so he takes his treasures and prepares to escape. But then he hears the merchant saying that he invented the fairy dog to deceive the traders. The noble accuses him again, but Xiaohua says he doesn't have time and throws a thunder talisman at him, telling him he's not allowed to lie in front of him. He starts torturing him while Yao insists he's not lying. The prota drops his sausage and wonders what the merchant is doing. The merchant says he knows they despise him, but he's the one who enriched himself and disrupted the market, and there is no fairy dog because he made it all up. Xiaohua withdraws the talisman, and the noble asks him not to be fooled, but the immortal says that the lightning changes if there's a demon nearby. But Yao didn't show any signs of contamination from spending time with the demon, so he's just a simple fraudster. This calms the prota down because the system didn't make him a demon, only an innocent dog. Yao thanks Xiaohua for the warning, but suddenly Xiaohua executes him with his sword and tells him that a shameless businessman just needs to be beheaded. The two men leave while Xiaohua says there are still many remnants of the association to deal with, and the prota runs towards Yao, asking him to hold on in his mind. Yao is glad he's okay, and his last words are that it was a pleasure to have met him. We see the merchants pleading for mercy from another immortal, whom they tell that they were bewitched by the demon Wang Yao. But he executes them for aiding a demon, just like another who freezes them and says that in the next life, they must not be evil again. The protagonist sees the city burning, wondering what kind of monsters the families brought and how they dare to carry out such a massacre. He thinks he still has a chance to change things, thanks to Wanian not joining the association, and starts running while telling them that they will pay for it. Then we see another immortal named Zhang Chufan, who tells Wanian that he must be punished for intimidating his companions and disturbing the market. He is about to execute him when Xiaoyan stops his sword with her hand and asks if he doesn't see that she's busy, so Chufan wonders if she's also a master. Wanian criticizes that his sect does everything with impunity and can punish and kill anyone. So Chufan says that a mortal like him cannot criticize the sect and that he should not think that he can escape just because he has an immortal protector. Then the rest of the sect appears, telling him that Yao has been executed. One of the girls says that Xiaoyan is a novice cultivator who doesn't seem older than her, and another says that she lost her way and grew up in the wrong direction. Chufan says that the 7 brothers have gathered to rid the city of evil, so they all unsheathe their swords and tell Wanian that he will not leave that place alive, even with the immortal master behind him. We see that he is referring to the butler, who they say has Kai that rises to the sky and is the best in hand-to-hand combat. The butler says he is just a servant and doesn't dare to call himself an immortal master. Wanian asks if he has already settled everyone in the house, and he tells him not to worry because everything is already arranged. Wanian then says that now that he has seen the attitude of the immortal sect, he is tired of playing with the city of Gusu, so they will go home when everything is over. The immortals begin their attack, and the butler tells Xiaoyan to protect Wanian while he faces them alone. In a scene change, we see the protagonist finding Yao's card and thinks that if he combines it with Wanian's wealth, they could turn the city upside down. Although he has to postpone that and join him because he will ensure that the sect members have a good death. He then sees some lightning in the front yard and wonders what is happening when there is an explosion. But when the protagonist goes to see, he only finds a huge crater, wondering why things ended up like this. The next day, one of the immortals says she's exhausted from exterminating the Fairy Dog Association. Despite killing them all, no trace of demonic activity was found. Another immortal regrets not having the ability to prevent Wanian from escaping. Chufan tells him that no one would have thought he was surrounded by monsters that could fight with swords hand to hand. The nobles thank them for cleaning the city of evil, but the immortals say that the city's offerings will be doubled from now on, which surprises the merchants who say it's too much. An immortal subdues them and tells them that doubling the offerings is fine since they helped eliminate their competitors. The merchants beg not to be killed, but they are told that they are not bad people, and as long as the offerings for the test are not affected, they don't care who controls the city of Gusu. So the merchants yield and say they will have the offering of the year ready. Later, we see the nobles discussing what they will do with the offering since they lost their wealth and could die for involving themselves with the immortals. The leader says they will have money once they obtain the association's wealth, and then the city will be theirs. However, when they go to the bank, they are told that the association's merchants' houses had no money as they shared it in a concentric account, and the money was transferred by someone with the card, so the leader wonders who Yao would share it with. The other two nobles say they lost everything and will be doomed if they can't pay the offering, which causes the leader to faint from the pressure. Meanwhile, the protagonist observes them thinking they are a bunch of trash, and the system says he now occupies the top spot of wealth in the city. So he completes the rookie mission and is rewarded with 300 points, which he can use to transform into a human by spending 10 points a day. The system warns him that his knowledge and skills may suddenly be worthless against the power of the immortals, which excites the protagonist, who tells the system he loves the world it created for him. The system gives him his next mission, which is to choose one of the 6 immortal sects and become their disciple. The protagonist says he promised to make those who killed Yao and ruined his plans pay, so he chooses the Wuji sect. Outside the city, we see that Wanian waited for the protagonist for 3 days. Since the 6 months they agreed with the brat are over, they can't wait any longer, so they prepare to return to the capital. The butler calls him Your Majesty as we see he is about to depart in a caravan that looks like that of a king. We are explained that in order to cultivate immortality, one must first learn martial arts. One must overcome 7 realms, and only after reaching the last one are they qualified to practice immortal law. Therefore, the 6 sects regularly evaluated martial artists in various places, and those who passed the test became disciples of these sects to learn and become masters of immortality. The system tells the protagonist that there is also no time limit for the mission. He thinks that he must cultivate to become a martial artist first and says that he will show the system the endurance of an animal. Suddenly, he dislocates his leg and says he is crazy for trying it as a dog. Even in human form, he would be too slow, so he transforms, while blaming the system for blocking his cultivation talent. In a scene change, we see him in a clothing store, thinking that he has enough points to take the test in human form. But if he runs out of points, he will have to take it as a dog. Then, the salesman tries to kick him out for being poor, but he shows him the card and tells him to pack the clothes. He thinks that the lack of a time limit is to prepare him for a dead end. He then goes to a weapons store where he buys everything, as well as in a jewelry store and a medicinal store. When he leaves, he finds an entire line of merchants who want to sell him products. The protagonist finds it difficult to carry everything home, so he decides to buy everything from them too. Later, we see him arriving at the pier, where he says he is exhausted from spending money. The merchants ask him where they should put all his purchases, and he tells them to put them on the boat. However, they cannot find a place to put them. Then, one called the Painting Trip arrives, where they say a beautiful courtesan named Vid works. The protagonist says that is the boat. The owner then asks him about the girl he wants to accompany him, and he says he wants them all, including her. We see that they load all his purchases, while he thinks that with the power of money, he will skip all the effort of martial artists in just 1 month. Vid asks her mother why she sold the boat, and although it's her lifelong dream, her mother tells her it's because the protagonist is paying too much money. It's enough for them to never have to work again. And she tells Vid that the protagonist wants her to come to his room at night. So she asks Vid to leave so she can think alone, and plans how to seduce the protagonist and take everything from him. The owner takes Vid to the protagonist's room, and he answers, but he realizes he's still transformed into a dog. So he transforms back into a human and invites her in. Vid introduces herself, but the protagonist ignores her beauty and quickly ushers her into the room, telling the owner to leave. The girl asks him what he would like her to do first, and when the protagonist asks if she is still a virgin, she timidly responds yes. The protagonist tells her to open her mouth and gives her a sphere to swallow, then asks her in detail how she feels. She says she begins to feel a warmth that begins to spread through her body, but it's like she's become stronger. The protagonist writes down the results in his notebook and gives her a new pill to try later. She asks him why he needs her to do that, and he responds that he needs to compare reactions in different people's bodies to see if the medication has the same effect on everyone. Since these pills are worth hundreds of thousands of taels, and one must be a virgin to try them and start in martial arts, she wonders if she has to eat all of them, and the protagonist tells her there won't be a problem. In fact, she'll have to do exercises to better digest the pills. The next day, the owner asks the girl how she's feeling because the lights were on all night. She says she achieved the body refinement realm by force due to the pills and will have to do more exercises and eat more to strengthen it, so she retires to her room to rest. Later, we see the protagonist with a full stomach, who thinks body refinement is the limit, even if you keep taking pills. He wonders if there is a drug that can increase his power for decades, so he concludes that he must find a high-level trainer to train him. We see that the protagonist's ship docked in the city of Xinwu, and then he left by horseback on land. Vid asks him why he wants to leave the city, and he tells her it's to enroll in a training class. He explains that the next phase to improve their bodies cannot be achieved alone with physical training, but requires guidance. The only option besides the immortal sects are martial arts schools. The most famous school in the area is Huishan School, where 3 immortal masters reside, and with their help, he can make his kingdom advance again. Vid tells him they have a long way to go, and it will be almost night when they arrive at the school. She offers the protagonist to rest on her lap for a nap, but he gets out of the carriage and tells the drivers that they will each receive 100 taels of silver if they arrive at their destination within an hour. The drivers hasten their pace. The protagonist tells Vid that as long as he uses the money correctly, he can buy anything with it, and she applauds him. But later on, we see the protagonist vomiting because he says the carriage has no shock absorption, and Vid tells him it's normal because they completed the half-day journey in just 1 hour. They enter the school and face the masters, and the protagonist tells them he came to meet them and learn martial arts. They inform him that the school has high requirements for its students, and they must pass an exam. The protagonist interrupts and tells them that he admires their discipline and hopes they can see his determination before the exam. He offers them a chest with 100,000 taels of gold and the equivalent value in spiritual pills as an offering. Vid warns the protagonist that the masters are noble and pure, and they expelled wealthy merchants who tried to offer them the same. But the masters are tempted by the treasures, and the protagonist tells them that if they were to expel him, it would be because he wasn't paying enough money. The oldest of the masters says it's enough, and reminds them not to forget the school's reputation. He tells the protagonist that he has seen his sincerity, and the test can begin. The old man tells the protagonist that the first part of the exam is the strength test, in which he has to hit and push a stone doll to make it fall into a hole. If he succeeds, it means he is qualified. One of the teachers asks if they will really do it because they could lose the offer from the protagonist, but he acknowledges that he would stand straight in front of such a large sum of money. Vid asks the protagonist what they will do because the old man looks very strict. The protagonist tells her not to worry because they are now also martial arts masters and have consumed elixirs that have transformed their bodies and bones. Therefore, an evaluation is not a problem. Vid asks if this refers to her as well, and the protagonist says it is an opportunity to test the strength they have accumulated. While he hits the stone, the masters are surprised, but then we see the protagonist suffer from the pain in his hand. They say he is too weak because he only pushed it 3 inches, and they think they lost the protagonist's offer. He thinks he should have shown them his financial cards, and those barbaric things do not suit him. But suddenly, the old man says that blow is acceptable because, despite his weakness, the evaluation proved pink strength, and it is considered acceptable. The protagonist understands what is happening and offers the old man 10,000 taels as a token of his appreciation. The old man tells him there is no limit to the tests he can take. Then we see the protagonist perform different tests, such as endurance, which he fails, and the protagonist offers him 20,000 taels, or the sensitivity test, where he ends up injured, and he says he will pay 50,000 taels. The old man tells him he is a rough diamond, but the other masters interrupt him and take him to another room. There, they question him about saying that money is not comparable to the school's prestige. But he answers that it is not about obtaining the money but how much money, because few can spend it in such amounts. So, he suspects that behind the protagonist, there may be an immortal sect, a royal family, or even some deity. So it is a good idea to build a good relationship with him, and they must maintain strict evaluation so that he does not underestimate them. Vid says they are cunning and asks the protagonist if they will not be against them. But he says he investigated them beforehand, and having a good amount of money is a deterrent in his favor. The test continues, and the masters say the next one is the root test, which determines the practitioner's talent, where there are 9 levels, with level 1 being the best. They give him a plaque where he must pour his blood to identify the root. The protagonist hesitates, but Vid helps him to extract just a drop when suddenly a dragon appears, indicating that his root is a first-class celestial vein. The teachers are surprised that the protagonist's root was of such high quality, while he questions that it shouldn't be that way since the system blocked his cultivation talent. So he asks if Vid can take the same test. They agree, and when the girl's blood touches the table, the result is also a superior root. The teachers say it's impossible for 2 to appear, so one of them tells him he should train physical skills with him. But she rejects him. Then they ask what kind of treasures they ate, and give some examples. When the protagonist says they ingested all of them and thinks that these are generally not available for money, but took advantage of the family's bankruptcy to acquire them, which caused them from hallucinations to physical torture. 2 of the teachers cry for not having money to get such treasures. The protagonist mocks the system as he managed to overcome his blockage. The elder then thinks that the protagonist is a bit mistaken, as he spends money like toilet paper. And although he seems like a failure, he has insurmountable roots and many treasures. So he thinks he could be a legendary individual whom the great masters could follow, and wonders what he's doing in his small martial arts hall, as well as whether he will ascend to heaven, or bring great disaster after accepting him. The elder begins to think about what to do, as he can ask the protagonist to leave for peace, but that could intimidate him and turn him against them. The other teachers realize he's rambling and ask him what's wrong, when suddenly he says he has made a decision, which is to spend his life with the protagonist, whom he tells to prepare to be his apprentice. But the protagonist tells him it's not necessary, as he doesn't want to be a student, and that his real project is to start a sect, and that everyone in the school should serve him for a month, because that's how they'll be admitted into the immortal sect, and in exchange, he'll give them everything they want. Vid asks the protagonist if it will work, and he tells her it will, because that small school can't ignore the power of money. And he asks the teachers what they will decide. We see that there are 26 days left until the test, and that the school staff is hurrying to not delay the cultivation of the protagonist, who they also teach the carefully formulated spiritual practice plan, making him think they are truly experts. Then the old man tells him that the first step is to master the circuit he prepared for him, which intimidates Vid and the protagonist a bit. The old man tells them that he has no time to waste, so they must begin training. And to complete the circuit he only needs to cross the door to the other side. So the protagonist thinks it's easy, and the old man tells him he will read him the formula so he can get there. But as soon as the protagonist steps onto the circuit, the posts start moving up and down, hitting him in his private parts, and then hitting him in the face. So the protagonist asks the old man to wait. But the old man doesn't stop, and a post sends him flying through the air, hitting him again when he returns to the circuit, until he's launched out of it, and the old man finishes reciting the formula. Vid runs to the protagonist, who is left as a deformed mass, and throws him healing water bottles to heal him. When he recovers, he yells at the old man that he almost died. One of the teachers tells him that since he hasn't studied any exercises, he needs to cultivate his physique, and the circuit is made for that. The protagonist then thinks that the shortcut is not so easy, so he asks the teacher to change the plan, and replace his meals with pills and his naps with medicinal baths, so he can work extra hours and improve faster. But we see that the protagonist continues to be hit by the circuit. 7 days later, we see Vid wondering why she doesn't catch the protagonist's attention, as she has tried everything to attract him, but he rejected her every time. She gets angry at martial arts, and the teacher New makes her go to the mountain springs for water. She shouts that men are great fools. Then she meets the school workers, whom she praises, and they begin working even faster, enamored by her charms, which leaves her satisfied because that's how normal men should react. We see that they surprise the protagonist because they finished the job quickly. At night, she is still frustrated because that's the only thing she could do and didn't make any progress with the protagonist. but she is convinced that she will make him fall for her charms. Some time later, we see the protagonist on the circuit, who is now able to defend himself and block and dodge attacks from the posts. He destroys them with a kick and crosses the final gate, thinking that it's not just muscle memory, but all the experience he accumulated playing video games. The masters congratulate the protagonist for overcoming that stage, but he doubts whether he really did, so he begins to review his notes to be sure. Vid lightly presses on the stone wrist, realizing she can push it with a finger. She tries to hold it to keep it from falling while the protagonist says that overcoming levels is really useful. The old man tells him that his martial arts school is unmatched, but also because the protagonist has a first-class foundation. As we see Vid stop the wrist and remember the training the master made her do, the protagonist asks her what she's doing. And she says nothing, so he asks what's next. The old man says it's the opening realm, the most difficult of martial arts, which involves opening one of the acupuncture points in the human body so that blood combined with Kai can pass through the remaining points and complete the cycle. It's the highest realm a martial artist can reach. They also tell him that there are 3 methods to achieve this. One is through meditation, to understand life and comprehend thoughts. The second is to fight to the death, to experience what it's like to be on the brink of death and overcome destiny. The third is through chivalrous acts of justice, to accumulate virtues of good. The old man tells him that, to test the 3 methods, warriors travel the world to accelerate their cultivation. The protagonist says it would take too long, as it took him 12 days just to cross the circuit gate. But the masters tell him it's the only way, and the most reliable one to succeed. So, the protagonist tells them he will have to gamble, and asks them to list everything he must do to achieve it. They show him all the possibilities and tell their staff to design a plan for all of them, and the protagonist sets out on his journey. Back in Gusu, the son of the noble leader, named Yair, confronts his father for not being able to participate in the Immortal test, as he didn't pay the offering. His father tells him he could inherit the family business instead, but Yair stabs him, saying that the family is unnecessary. Yair asks his companions about the protagonist, and they tell him he is under surveillance, although they found nothing about his origin. But Yair says the offering is still the most important thing. In a restaurant, the protagonist says that everyone will know about him from that day forward. The teachers are happy that he's so excited to travel the world. Suddenly some bullies appear, hitting and demanding money from the restaurant owner. The teachers say that it's a perfect situation for the protagonist. The owner asks him for help, but he tells her to leave, disappointing everyone. Vid tells him that he can't do that, as they are there to defeat the bad guys. The protagonist remembers that it's true, so he resumes his speech and offers his services to the bandits. They make money too slowly, and it's better to make a fortune together. Vid tells him again that they're there to do justice, but the protagonist says that he helped solve the problem. The bandit reads a regulation from the protagonist, in which they will ensure market protection. And he says everything turned out great, so Vid says he has a problem with his understanding of justice, and the system says it failed. The next day, an old woman asks for help in killing a chicken, but he tells her that it's more efficient to make a farm of them, so it results in failure. Then a boy asks him to find an herb for his sick father, but the protagonist tells him that he needs to buy many materials with those characteristics, and he fails again that time. So all the citizens end up asking for his help to help them succeed, and his journey results in failure. At the inn, the teachers talk about all the businesses the school already has, when the old man suddenly wonders what they're doing, and that they should be helping the protagonist on his journey. He says he's done many good things, so he should understand soon. But they tell him that's not the case, and he didn't mention anything he did, as he must draw his sword, kill, and leave his name and fame behind for that. The protagonist tells them they're stupid because doing that won't solve the problems he encountered in the long run. This makes the old man furious, who tells him that from that day on, they will train him in the fairest way possible. And they bet on their school that they will turn him into a hero, starting with appearance, manners, and language. So the protagonist says that he just has to pretend to be a hero then, and he has experience in that. Some time later we see the protagonist encountering a robbery, and the group decides to act according to plan, as the escort won't last much longer. The protagonist says he will show them what it means to pretend to be a hero. The bandits wound the guard and demand the merchandise, but he tells them he swore to deliver it to its destination, so they can't have it. Then his daughter comes out of the carriage with a knife to help him, but one of the bandits is about to kill her when suddenly he is disarmed and the protagonist appears asking if the girl is okay. The thugs then surround and attack the protagonist, but we see him lightly draw his sword while Vid plays a melody, and suddenly he defeats a bunch of bandits with one move. The guard asks if the girl is okay and she asks if the protagonist is the hero her father always talks about. The bandits say his sword is too fast, as they didn't see him move at all, and wonder who he is. The protagonist tells them his name, thinking that's what it means to pretend to be a hero, of which he is proud. Meanwhile, we see the masters among the trees, where the old man says he's exhausted and another of them tells him he's not really old, as his sword is still fast. We also see Vid, who wonders if she should continue playing the song. The bandits say he's just a traveler, so they attack again. The protagonist tells them they will discover the strongest ability of his family, and the three masters suddenly emerge from the forest and mercilessly attack the bandits. As the defeated bandits lie on the ground, their leader wonders what happened. And that's how the first part of this manhwa ends. If you've reached this part of the video, let me tell you that you've been one of the few people to make it this far, so comment the word dog in the comments and remember to subscribe so you don't miss any videos. That being said, see you in the next video.